some extemporaneous musings on the distinction between John Searle's Chinese room argument and Alan Turing's statement on the AI problem. Generally, my version of Searle is sort of like Gorgias, an ancient sophist who is exciting to the crowds and especially to the young at the time. So Searle may not be exciting to young people today, I don't know. But, and also he's fallen afoul of some kind of charges for sexual misconduct. But at one time he was, there was a lot of excitement around him. So Turing's version, so the basic question is artificial intelligence actually intelligent? And so Turing's version is to say the question is too stupid to be asked. So he says that flat out. And if challenged, his answer is to point to a typewriter. So I think right off there's the possibility of two big senses of intelligence confusing us. One is if a device does something complex, like a typewriter, and also that we like, we could say the typewriter is an intelligent device, just as the mechanism of a watch, with all the gears and the spring and everything, are in some way intelligent. But in the sense of, do they have intelligence? Are they agents? Do they have it seems to be similar to the question of, is it alive? And the question's already answered a priori. The typewriter's not alive. So what can we mean? So let's for a second, let's look at Turing. What Turing is saying here is, what he's saying is, the question is too, I'm sort of stating it as if it were John Searle, the question is too stupid to be asked. Is that right? I think, yeah, because it's not the typewriter's not alive. So what are we even talking about? But then you want to ask, sort of like, how does this? What about all these plants here? Are plants intelligent? And then we could say, well, plants are alive, and then there's an obscurity about the life of plants in the sense that even if plants don't have a brain or kind of a central nervous system or something like they don't even have the stomach brain like we have. They don't have neurons. They don't have anything that makes their one sense, if they can be said to have one sense, sort of coordinate with it's not, there's no center of them in a certain way. But nonetheless, it seems like say, we would say they do have this one sense of, if not touch in the sense that human beings experience, touch, such that we could then say there's a qual that goes along with them, or quality or subjective experience. They nonetheless have some kind of complex relationship with the environment which is not merely mechanical. It doesn't seem, unless, so then that would hang partially on whether the growing towards the light, for instance, is totally to be understood as a mechanical process without, it's obscure in some way. Even when we talk about photosynthesis, it's obscure whether there's more to get out of the theory of photosynthesis, or whether what's been demonstrated so far as the way that it operates, as the way that it happens, whether the description is complete. And yeah, so whether when we describe plants we're describing a mechanical system, something like that. Certainly parts of animals can be described as a mechanical system, and then of course famously with Descartes we have this presentation of a way that we could sort of present a version which later becomes sort of virtual reality theories of like there's the one version, I don't like him, but the guy Thomas Campbell, who I regard basically as a fake. Most of what he says is nonsense, but he does present this question in an incoherent way, whether there could be a test of whether an animal or a plant is simply a mechanical part of the simulation, or whether it's an active agent in the simulation on the basis of the double slit experiment. His test doesn't make sense because it would it's basically saying it's basically the same thing as the pineal gland problem. He's basically saying we could know through something happening in the physical system whether or not something is or is not that has this Cartesian, he doesn't put it in these terms, but has the Cartesian cognito, the thinking substance. That kind of problem could be presented as like in the same way that the questions on the existence of proofs of the existence of God are presented as a intellectual problem which could be solved like a math problem. But then I think the biggest problem with those is they're simply not really satisfying. People say, okay, maybe it's proved, but so what? Because we want things to be proved out by life. There's kind of two senses of the word proof. In this sense, there's like proof of geometrical thesis, like the Pythagorean theorem. But then there's things proved out by living them by life, which is something probably more satisfying form of proof. So the typewriter is clearly, Turing's pointing to just a mechanical system. So therefore, so the system is made up of inanimate things, only animated by the fact of the movement of the machine, one thing pushing another thing. It's basically like a chain of dominoes, but just arranged differently. There's no problem with respect to the pineal gland, or with respect to whether or not this thing is alive. That's the way Turing sees it, I suppose. Now, the Searle version seems to me sort of just a worse version of that, where what he says is there's syntax or the ordering of words or signs, and then there's semantics, which is this magical quality of meaning. And I guess that somebody who studied this back in the day would have thought of Chomsky's claim that syntax is universal across empirically known languages. I doubt if Searle ever really said anything about that. I don't know. Maybe Grok would tell us immediately. But, I mean, whether he said anything about what the distinction... This is where Searle is weak. I feel like his intellect isn't the strongest type of intellect, which makes him useless. He's just that he's kind of a good speaker, and he's always sticks to the same stupid line, sort of like Scalia with his... legislature means legislature, or he's good at sticking to something very stupid and just and just making a ea to it, like, as Nietzsche says. He gives life to things that anyone else would regard as too stupid to harp on. I think, and it's sort of stupid partly because the Turing version is just more natural and better. But the Chinese room version is you're just shuffling around symbols, and this is supposed to be the same as syntax. I don't know if that's really the way Chomsky uses syntax, which makes me kind of wonder. They have, the way I think of Searle is kind of like they're playing a game in the Oxbridge or whatever, and then Searle just kind of gets a sense of how the game is played, and he copies it, and then these are the type of moves played in this game, and then he's kind of good at imitating it. That's the way he comes off to me. So that there's nothing, he's not good at sort of originating new questions or finding new directions. He's good at sort of stupidly insisting on little things within the already existing questions and then putting them on television. Well, or at least he was at one time. I mean, he's too old to do that now. And also he was disgraced, so it's like he's been out of commission for some time. But on the other hand, so the ancient sophists has been dead for all these many years, and we're still talking about them. So I suppose the Chinese room problem may continue for some time. I don't see why it won't. Not that it's topical, except with persons like myself. I don't know. But how does it go? It says syntax versus semantics, and the AI only has syntax, which is the ordering of the symbols. And I guess I would add, I don't know if you would immediately agree with this, that the syntax would then be the same thing as mathematical symbols understood as algorithms. So Turing himself was one of the first ones to start using the notion of that algorithm is, I mean, even though obviously the word is older than that, but the algorithm is a series of calculations that can be turned into an engineering device that engineers can take and immediately turn into a physical device. That is, there's immediate translation into a physical device with the algorithm, unlike with most of mathematics, which can't be directly made into a physical system. And that's how Turing saw advanced computation advancing, and I think that's how it has advanced. I don't actually see any change in that. I think AI is still, right now, the current AI is an advanced autofill. What makes it strange is that it's accessing real data that's popping into the environment in real time. So there used to be an argument And I think it was an argument Searle made also that if you have subatomic randomness interact with your syntax machine, let's call it that way, then then you get out of this problem that supposedly whatever the programmers put in isn't the limit. So whatever the programmers put into the current AI or autofill machines, it isn't the whole of the machine, because they're interacting with the world in the sense that people are inputting data on to the internet, and then they interact with that. And moreover, everybody that uses Grok is, even though the large language model or whatever part of Grok is pre-programmed, there's a part of it that's being trained by every user of Grok to give, and then that's going back into this sort of hive mind or whatever, and it's learning. So it's learning based on an experience with things that the first programmer didn't put in, but it goes also for the subatomic randomness argument. It's just a different form of input. So it's totally dependent on the input, but there's input that's from the programmer, and then there's input that's from the point of view of the programmer is more random. It's like you could have input based on S&P 500. You could have input based on the fluctuations of the markets. You could have input based on war of algorithms. You could have input based on some kind of how do they call it? The Brownian motion. This restlessness at the level of Brownian motion that Trump is somehow represents the breaking out of at the level of the world political struggle, I think. So you could have all kinds of input, but the machine is it has no. There's no arriveness, there's no spontaneous transcendental point in the sense that Descartes set up the question. So no, in the sense that Descartes set up the question is the point where Husserl starts, because Husserl says the omnibus dubitandum, or the absolute doubt, is his starting point, but he just stays with it in a way and just says, out of this we continually recognize the states of the natural attitude and the Naturstellung and the theoretical attitude. But different ways of dealing with this come out. But let's try to think about this from the point of view of AI. I would say, so from the point of view of Heidegger-Dasein, what Heidegger says is it's immediate that we sense that the other human beings, so we don't have a solipsism problem for Dasein, because immediately what's given prior to any doubt is that the other human beings are alive and there in their agency. So that's solved from the point of view of Dasein just by pointing to how the world is. The problem, I mean, you can add on to that then the skeptical problem, but it's in addition to what we're directly have in the Arigness. Now, maybe you could breed up through maybe you could have see, the thing is, you'd have to have a family that, maybe you could have a family somehow, sort of like that para aduma problem. The para aduma problem was that red bull, red heifer in Israel, where everybody is contaminated, so then you would never have anybody who could do the ritual without being contaminated, unless they were like a bubble boy or something, and then they tried to raise some bubble boys in Israel, but the secular authority shut it down and wouldn't let them do that. So it's like everybody's already contaminated at birth. In the same way with human beings in general, if we think everybody, by having parents who have certain views, the views prior to any schoolroom rubs off on them, then how would you ever get a human being that has totally some kind of skeptical view about whether the other beings exist? I suppose that does happen, and maybe it happens to an extent with, say, Israeli families with respect to Palestinians, and maybe vice versa. So maybe that did happen over generations, and maybe there's more extreme versions could be shown. It happens, and I suppose it happens in all kinds of ways with regard to the way we think about, I mean, if the Druid thinks about an oak tree, I don't think our oak trees in California are the same thing as the oak trees that Druids were talking about. But, there's one there. But that's not, I don't think that's the same tree that the Druids worship as the tree of Zeus. But in any case, there could be different attitudes that one would grow into prior to any schooling by seeing, as it were, the example of the people around one when one's an infant, and how they behave towards the environment and so on. But this question of whether, I guess I'm kind of trailing off into the tapered edge of the bell curve, as it were, but maybe we'll discover some little points of entry into the problem. The thing that occurs to me is that when one uses Grok, it's very easy to, just as with, say, a stuffed animal or something, say a kid with a stuffed animal, it's very easy to sort of imbue it with a personality and a life, and to think it has, and to consider it like Mr. Grok, and to give it personality. And then and then when you look and you see this is what Grok is actually doing from the technical point of view, it's just this syntax, it's just this stupid typewriter, it's just this autofill machine on a larger scale, writ bigly. Then you kind of you're shaken with that in a way, and it's sort of like the move from a certain form of religiosity to a certain form of rationalism, and then neither way maybe seems totally satisfying. And then one can say, I guess that's where the problem comes in, because then one can say, along with I don't know if Sam Harris actually speaks this way, but with this sort of engineering mindset, you could say, well, isn't it that we're doing the same thing with human beings, and just acting like this human being is intelligent, and we judge by ourselves. In other words, we think this is what we consider intelligent behavior, and does the dog show it, does this human being show it, does this race show it, and that's how we judge based on our prejudice, as it were, about what intelligence is like, and how else could we judge it. We could try to deceive ourselves, not know what the right hand, not know what the left hand is doing, by pointing to some IQ test, because this IQ test is independent because it's been around for 200 years and it's been tested by the institutions. Although, of course, this is a kind of feedback loop, because if the institutions get to start to want people that are good at these tests, then that's the ones they select for, and then those are the ones that go on to hold those positions. And then if your idea of nobility is a certain some kind of how do they call that, certificatism or something, then of course then you're going to say this person has 4 certificates, and therefore they're successful, and the IQ test was selected for that. And so it gets to be this sort of thing that has a life of its own, but isn't really the direct thing, and which is kind of obvious because of, to use that Daniel Kahneman language, the system one sense of intelligence is totally different. That gets us into problems too. It seems to me that it's more direct in that what Americans call, say, a dumb jock, and what Americans call an intelligent man. Say Zizek appears intelligent, appears like an intelligent man, even though when you kind of studied him, you start to think he's dishonest and he has a lot of problems. But just on the first flash, he's, by comparison to, say, I don't know, Dwayne Johnson or somebody, let's say Derrida, Jacques Derrida, it's clear that Derrida is more intelligent just on immediate impression than, let me think, Matthew McConaughey, for instance. It's obvious, right? It's sort of, there's some direct, but then some people say, oh no, but he has a certain wisdom, or he knows more about this kind of life, or something, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, all these questions of what intelligence is could come in. I would say the big breaking point is, I would throw everything out and say the big breaking point is, are we pointing to a typewriter or aren't we? And then the typewriter version, you could always say, one, because we use the internet, so or somebody's driving around in their Tesla and talking to the Grok, and it's like they're talking to their friend or something. And you get these situations where you don't notice that you're pointing to a typewriter, but aren't you still actually just pointing to a typewriter? And then isn't the question really, does it actually make sense to say a typewriter is an intelligent being? Why would that make sense? And then you have, I think that would have to be handled on either, you'd have to go through the transcendental analysis and see if there's any break where we're mistaken about the distinction between inanimate devices and living things with a center of intelligence or agency. And then you'd have to go up to the Heidegger-Wittgenstein. I mean, I think there's classical philosophy, there's the Zizek point, which is the Kim Novak pointing to the cross sections in the redwood tree in Vertigo, saying, here I was born and here I died, which indicates the move from Kant to Hegel, German idealism. And then there's the current thing is the Wittgenstein Heidegger problems, where we're asking what actually is was ist Denken, because what is thinking is the same question as what is language.